For centuries, no one dared enter Moonwood clearing after sunset. In the heart of the ancient forest stood the oldest white wolf anyone had ever seen, a silent guardian whose silver eyes had watched kingdoms rise, fall, and disappear into legend. Hunters feared him. Kings avoided him. And every child grew up believing that anyone who stood before him would never return the same. Then, on the first snowfall of winter, an ordinary herbalist stepped into the sacred clearing and whispered a single sentence into the ancient wolf's ear. Instead of attacking, the mighty guardian slowly lowered his head. From every corner of the forest, wolves emerged from the shadows, and one by one, every single one of them knelt. What did she whisper? Who was this quiet young woman? And why did the wolves recognize a forgotten truth that an entire kingdom had buried for generations? For as long as anyone in the kingdom of Eldor could remember, Moonwood Forest belonged to silence after sunset. Travelers hurried past its towering pines before dusk. Hunters refused to follow wounded deer beneath its dark branches. Even the bravest soldiers lowered their voices whenever they spoke of the clearing hidden deep inside the forest, where a circle of weathered standing stones surrounded the oldest white wolf anyone had ever known. No one remembered when he had first appeared. Some claimed he had watched over Moonwood before the kingdom itself existed. Others believed he was not a wolf at all, but a forgotten king cursed by the spirits of the mountains. Children grew up listening to stories about his silver eyes. They were told never to look into them, because those who did never returned the same. Yet every tale ended differently. Only one thing never changed. The ancient white wolf remained. Waiting. Watching. As though time itself had become his companion. Several miles from the haunted forest rested the peaceful village of Briar Glen. Tiny cottages lined narrow dirt roads that curved beside a clear river where children chased ducks during spring and fishermen repaired their nets beneath old willow trees. Smoke curled gently from stone chimneys. The scent of fresh bread drifted through crisp morning air. Life moved slowly there. The people worked hard. They laughed easily. And they knew one another by name. On the edge of the village stood a small cottage wrapped in climbing ivy. Bundles of drying herbs hung beneath its wooden roof. Clay pots overflowed with lavender, mint, rosemary, and tiny white flowers whose names only one person in Briar Glen seemed to remember. That cottage belonged to Liora. She had lived there alone since the winter sickness claimed both her parents nearly 10 years earlier. The villagers often offered help. She always thanked them. Yet somehow she preferred quiet mornings, birdsong, and the company of growing things. Each sunrise began the same way. She filled a woven basket with empty cloth pouches. She watered the herbs outside her window. Then she disappeared into the forest long before anyone else had begun their day. Nature had become her family. She knew where wild thyme hid beneath flat stones. She knew which stream stayed warm enough for healing moss even during winter. She could tell approaching rain simply by watching sparrows fly lower across the fields. The forest never frightened her. It welcomed her. That morning the first snow of the season floated gently through the air. Thin white flakes landed upon golden leaves that still clung stubbornly to ancient oaks. Liora walked slowly beneath towering pines, brushing frozen dew from fern leaves as she searched for winter herbs. The forest smelled of damp earth and pine resin. Far overhead, ravens called across the grey sky. Near a fallen cedar she stopped. A small rabbit lay trembling beneath tangled roots. Its tiny hind leg had been caught beneath a broken branch. The frightened animal tried to crawl away. Liora slowly knelt. "It's all right." Her voice barely disturbed the quiet morning. "I won't hurt you." The rabbit froze. Her hands moved carefully. She lifted the heavy branch, wrapped the injured leg with soft linen, then placed a handful of dried berries beside the frightened little creature before quietly stepping away. Only after she disappeared between the trees did the rabbit begin eating. She smiled to herself. Kindness asked for nothing in return. That was exactly how her parents had raised her. By midday she returned to Briar Glen carrying baskets filled with herbs. The village square buzzed with cheerful voices preparing for the coming winter. Children stacked firewood. Women hung dried vegetables beneath sheltered porches. Blacksmiths hammered horseshoes while warm sparks danced into the cold afternoon air. Old Martha waved from beside her bakery. "Liora!" She held up a fresh loaf wrapped inside a cloth. "You'll forget to eat again." Liora laughed softly. "I remembered yesterday." "You remembered after sunset." Old Martha folded her arms. "That hardly counts." The young herbalist accepted the bread with grateful hands. "Thank you." Nearby, several hunters loaded supplies onto wooden carts. One of them, a broad-shouldered man named Edwin, noticed the fresh pine needles clinging to her boots. "You've been near Moonwood again." She looked surprised. "Only gathering herbs." His smile disappeared. "You should stay farther south." Another hunter quietly nodded. "Fresh tracks were found yesterday." "Wolves." Edwin slowly shook his head. "One wolf." "The white one." Conversation around them faded. Even the children stopped playing. Nobody liked speaking about the ancient white wolf. Old Martha quietly touched the wooden charm hanging around her neck. "They say he watches anyone foolish enough to enter his forest." Liora looked toward the distant mountains rising beyond the village rooftops. "I've walked those woods many times." "And?" Edwin asked. "I've never seen him." The hunter seemed almost relieved. "I hope you never do." Late that afternoon, snow began falling more heavily. Dark clouds rolled across the mountains while icy winds swept through Briar Glen. Parents called children indoors. Doors closed. Lanterns flickered warmly behind frosted windows. Liora had just finished arranging dried herbs across her wooden shelves when hurried knocking rattled her front door. She opened it immediately. A young mother stood outside, breathing hard. Tears glistened across her cheeks. "My son." She gasped. "He ran after our little dog." Lyra's heart tightened. "Where?" "The northern woods." "The tracks." The woman struggled to catch her breath. "They lead toward Moonwood." For one terrible moment, neither woman spoke. Everyone knew what waited beyond those ancient trees. Villagers whispered prayers. Hunters reached for boughs. Yet no one stepped forward. The daylight was already fading. Night belonged to Moonwood. Edwin finally lowered his eyes. "We'll search at first light." The desperate mother stared at him in disbelief. "He'll freeze before morning." Silence answered her. Liora looked toward the forest. Then back toward the frightened woman. Without another word, she grabbed her cloak, lifted her lantern, and hurried into the falling snow. "Liora!" Edwin shouted after her. "You don't know what's out there." She paused only long enough to answer. "I know what's out there." She looked toward the dark forest. "A little boy who needs someone." Then she disappeared into the snow. Moonwood greeted her with silence. Not ordinary silence. The kind that settled over ancient places where every sound felt important. Snow cushioned her footsteps. Towering pines blocked most of the fading daylight, leaving only narrow ribbons of pale light stretching across untouched ground. She knelt beside tiny footprints. A child's. Beside them danced smaller paw prints. The little dog. They came this way. The wind carried no answer. Only the slow creaking of ancient branches swaying overhead. The deeper she walked, the older the forest seemed to become. Tree trunks widened until 3 people together could not have wrapped their arms around them. Thick moss covered enormous stones carved long ago by hands no longer remembered. She passed broken statues nearly hidden beneath vines. Weathered faces stared silently toward the sky. Who had built them? No one in Briar Glen knew. Perhaps. No one alive remembered. The trail continued. Fresh footprints crossed a narrow stream where thin ice cracked beneath her boots. Beyond it the trees suddenly opened. Liora stepped into a vast clearing. The snowfall stopped. Not because the storm had ended. Because the towering stone circle rising around the clearing sheltered everything inside. Ancient standing stones reached toward the darkening sky. Strange symbols covered their weathered surfaces. Moonlight broke through the clouds just long enough to paint the clearing in soft silver. At its center stood the little boy. Completely unharmed. His tiny dog wagged its tail happily beside him. Neither seemed frightened. Neither moved. Both stared ahead in complete silence. Liora slowly followed their gaze. At the far edge of the clearing, a massive white wolf stood watching them. His coat gleamed like fresh snow beneath the moon. Scars crossed his broad shoulders, telling stories older than memory itself. His silver eyes held neither hunger nor anger, only endless patience. The cold wind stirred the thick fur around his neck. He did not growl. He did not bare his teeth. He simply looked at Liora, as though, after centuries of waiting, the one person he had been expecting had finally arrived. For several long heartbeats, nothing moved. Snow rested upon the broad shoulders of the ancient white wolf without melting, as though even winter respected the quiet strength that stood before him. His silver eyes remained fixed on Liora, calm and unreadable, reflecting the pale moonlight that filtered through the towering stones. The little boy looked from the wolf to Liora. "Miss." His tiny voice barely disturbed the silence. "He found Milo." The little dog wagged its tail and rubbed happily against the enormous wolf's front leg, completely unaware that it stood beside the creature every story in the kingdom called a monster. Liora slowly walked toward the frightened child. Every careful step echoed softly across the ancient clearing. She expected the wolf to react, to growl, to block her path. He did neither. Instead, he stood perfectly still, watching her with the patient gaze of someone who had witnessed countless winters pass. When she finally reached the little boy, she gently wrapped her cloak around his shivering shoulders. "You're freezing." He nodded. "I got lost." "I know." She smiled warmly. "But you're safe now." The child looked up at the white wolf. "He stayed with me." Lyra's eyes drifted back toward the guardian. His thick fur carried fresh snow. Several old scars crossed his powerful chest. One scar, much older than the rest, disappeared beneath the long white fur around his neck. It looked strangely deliberate. Not the mark of another animal. The mark of steel. Someone had once tried to kill him. Yet despite the pain he must have known, he had protected a frightened child instead of abandoning him. Something inside Liora quietly shifted. The stories suddenly felt wrong. She slowly turned toward the great wolf. The cold breeze carried the scent of pine and fresh snow between them. Without thinking about fear or old legends, she placed one hand over her heart. "Thank you." Her voice was soft enough to disappear into the wind. "Thank you for keeping him safe." The wolf blinked once. Liora took another cautious step. She could now see every silver strand woven through his thick winter coat. Every quiet breath rising into the freezing air. She leaned slightly closer, almost as though speaking to an old friend. "The forest remembers kindness." Her whisper floated gently through the clearing. "So do I." For the first time in centuries, the ancient white wolf lowered his head. Not because he had been defeated. Not because he had been commanded. Because he chose to. The movement was slow, graceful, filled with quiet respect. The little boy gasped. Liora stood completely still. She had not expected anything to happen. Then, a long howl echoed through Moonwood. Another answered. Then another. The sound rolled across the mountains until it seemed every tree had found its own voice. Shadows began moving between the pines. Golden eyes appeared one after another beyond the standing stones. Grey wolves stepped into the clearing. Black wolves followed. Young wolves. Old wolves carrying scars earned through countless winters. Within moments, more than 40 wolves surrounded the ancient circle. None growled. None hunted. Every pair of eyes rested upon the ancient white wolf. The great guardian slowly lifted his head. He looked toward the gathered pack. Then back toward Liora. One after another. Every wolf lowered itself onto the frozen earth. Some bent their heads. Others folded quietly onto their front legs. The entire forest bowed. The only sound came from the wind whispering through the ancient stones. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. The little boy clutched her sleeve. "There." He searched for words. "They're bowing to you." "No," Liora whispered. "They're honoring him." But deep inside, she wasn't entirely certain. The ancient white wolf never looked away from her. The spell was broken by distant voices. "Liam." Men shouted somewhere beyond the trees. Torches flickered through the darkness. The search party had finally entered Moonwood. The wolves reacted immediately. Not with fear. With discipline. They quietly stepped backward into the forest. Within seconds, nearly every wolf had vanished among the towering pines. Only the ancient white wolf remained. He watched Liora one final time. Then he turned and disappeared so silently that the drifting snow became the only proof he had ever been there. Moments later, Edwin and several hunters burst into the clearing. Their faces were pale. Lanterns shook in trembling hands. They froze the instant they saw Liora standing safely beside the child. Edwin rushed forward. "Liam." The little boy ran into his father's arms. "We thought we'd lost you." The child pointed toward the forest. "The white wolf found me." Every hunter became perfectly still. Another man looked toward Liora. "You saw him?" She nodded slowly. "He wasn't hunting." Edwin frowned. "What?" "He protected your son." The hunters exchanged uneasy glances. "No," one whispered. "That's impossible." Liam looked confused. "He kept me warm." He pointed toward the snow where enormous paw prints circled the place he had been standing. "He chased away something else." The hunters looked down. Beyond the wolf tracks lay another trail. Massive claw marks. Far larger than any ordinary wolf. The snow around them had been stained with dark blood. Something terrible had entered Moonwood that evening. Something the ancient white wolf had driven away before anyone arrived. No one spoke during the journey home. By sunrise, the story had spread across Briar Glen. Some villagers believed the child. Others insisted fear had clouded his memory. Old Martha quietly listened while kneading bread. "Liora doesn't lie." Edwin rubbed his tired face. "I know." "Then perhaps." The old woman looked toward the forest beyond the village. "We've misunderstood the old stories." Not everyone agreed. Fear rarely surrendered to truth without resistance. Traveling merchants carried the tale from one village to another. By week's end, whispers reached nearby castles. By month's end, they reached the royal capital. Prince Cedric listened without blinking. The throne room of Highstone Castle was vast and cold. Long banners bearing the royal falcon hung between towering stone pillars. Outside, winter winds rattled stained-glass windows overlooking the snow-covered valley below. A royal messenger knelt before the throne. "I questioned everyone myself, Your Highness." The stories match. Cedric slowly rested one hand upon the carved arm of his throne. "A village herbalist," he said quietly, "walked into Moonwood." "Yes." "The ancient white wolf spared her." "Yes." The wolves bowed. The messenger lowered his head. "Every witness says the same." Silence settled across the throne room. Prince Cedric rose. He walked toward the great window overlooking his kingdom. Snow covered every road stretching beyond the capital. Somewhere beyond those distant mountains, a secret had survived generations. His reflection stared back at him in the frozen glass. "Legends have power." His voice remained calm. "And power belongs to the crown." He slowly turned toward his captain of the guard. "Take 50 men." The captain straightened immediately. "Yes, Your Highness." Cedric's eyes grew colder. "Bring me the woman." "And the white wolf." The prince looked toward the storm gathering over the northern forests. "If it resists." His expression never changed. "Kill it." Far away, beneath the silent pines of Moonwood, the ancient white wolf suddenly lifted his head. The wind had changed. And somewhere deep within the ancient forest, the guardians already knew that men carrying iron and ambition were marching toward their sacred home. Dawn arrived beneath a sky the color of cold iron. A thin mist drifted between the ancient pines of Moonwood, softening the edges of towering trees until the entire forest seemed suspended between dream and memory. Frost clung to every branch, sparkling whenever the first rays of sunlight slipped through the thick canopy. Liora had not slept. The stories whispered through Briar Glen the night before had spread farther than anyone imagined. Curious villagers gathered outside her little cottage. Some looked at her with admiration. Others crossed themselves as she passed, uncertain whether they stood near a blessed soul or someone who had awakened an ancient curse. She answered none of their questions. Instead, she packed fresh herbs, clean bandages, dried bread, and a small leather flask before quietly leaving the village. Something deep inside her heart told her the ancient white wolf was waiting. The forest welcomed her with its familiar silence. Snow crunched beneath her boots while tiny birds darted through pine branches overhead. The smell of cedar and frozen earth filled the morning air. She reached the Moonwood clearing shortly after sunrise. The standing stones stood exactly as they had the night before. Only now the clearing was empty. No white wolf. No child. Only fresh paw prints circling the ancient stones. Liora slowly knelt beside them. "They're waiting," she whispered. As though answering her words, a raven landed upon one of the weathered stones. It tilted its head toward the northern mountains. Then flew away. Moments later another raven appeared. Then another. Without making a sound, all three birds flew in the same direction. North. Liora smiled faintly. "My father always said the forest speaks to those willing to listen." She rose to her feet. "I'm listening." She followed the tracks. The journey carried her far beyond the places she had explored while gathering herbs. The trees grew taller. The air became colder. Ancient roots twisted across the earth like sleeping serpents. Hours passed before she noticed movement ahead. The ancient white wolf stood upon a rocky ridge overlooking a narrow valley. The morning sun turned his white coat almost silver. He did not approach. He simply looked toward Liora. Then calmly continued walking. Not away from her. Ahead of her. Leading. She followed without hesitation. The path narrowed until steep cliffs rose on either side. Water trickled beneath thin sheets of ice. Colorful moss covered ancient stones untouched by human hands for generations. Occasionally the great wolf glanced behind him, making certain she still followed. By afternoon they reached a hidden waterfall. Crystal water spilled from the mountains into a clear pool below. Behind the falling curtain shimmered the dark opening of a cave. The wolf disappeared inside. Liora hesitated only a moment before stepping through the icy water. The cave opened into something she never imagined. Sunlight poured through natural openings high above, illuminating an enormous underground sanctuary. Stone pillars rose toward the ceiling like the trunks of giant trees. Wildflowers somehow bloomed despite the winter outside. Crystal streams wound quietly between polished rocks. Along the walls stood dozens of carved statues. Not of kings. Not of warriors. Of wolves standing beside men and women wearing ancient crowns. Each carving showed the same thing. A ruler resting one hand upon a wolf's shoulder. Partners. Not masters. Liora slowly walked closer. Her fingertips brushed centuries-old carvings worn smooth by time. Above one statue were words written in an ancient language she could not read. "You've come farther than anyone in many years." The gentle voice echoed through the sanctuary. Liora turned quickly. An elderly man wearing simple grey robes stepped from behind one of the stone pillars. His long white beard reached nearly to his waist. A carved wooden staff rested comfortably in his weathered hands. His kind eyes smiled before his lips did. "You must be Brother Thomas." The old monk looked pleasantly surprised. "I've never told you my name." "You just felt." She searched for the right word. "Familiar." He chuckled softly. "The forest has always introduced people better than I ever could." The ancient white wolf quietly walked to the old monk's side. Brother Thomas gently rested one wrinkled hand against the great wolf's neck. The guardian closed his eyes. Not like an animal accepting affection. Like an old friend greeting another after a long journey. They sat beside a small fire burning within a circle of smooth stones. The flames filled the sanctuary with gentle warmth while the distant waterfall provided a soothing rhythm. Brother Thomas poured hot pine needle tea into two simple clay cups. For a while they drank in comfortable silence. Finally the monk looked toward the great white wolf. "You've already guessed." Liora nodded slowly. "He isn't just protecting this forest." "No. Brother Thomas's eyes drifted toward the ancient carvings. He protects a promise. The old monk rose and walked toward the largest mural inside the sanctuary. It stretched across nearly the entire stone wall. Time had faded many of its colors, yet the story remained clear. Long ago, men and wolves had stood together beneath the same banner. Children played among wolf pups. Kings walked through forests without guards. Fields overflowed with harvest. Rivers sparkled beneath bright skies. It wasn't always this way, Brother Thomas said quietly. The first rulers of Eldor were never chosen because they were the strongest. Liora listened carefully. They were chosen because they loved what they ruled. His weathered fingers traced the carved outline of a crowned woman standing beside a white wolf. When a new king or queen was worthy, the wolves accepted them. And if they weren't? The old monk's smile faded. The wolves walked away. Silence settled over the sanctuary. Liora looked toward the ancient white wolf. So what happened? Brother Thomas sighed deeply. Greed. He spoke the word almost like a prayer for forgiveness. One royal family desired power more than responsibility. They hunted wolves. They burned sacred forests. They erased every record that reminded people the kingdom once belonged to both mankind and nature. He lowered his hand. The covenant was broken. Liora stared at the oldest carving. The white wolf looked almost identical to the guardian standing only a few feet away. How old is he? Brother Thomas smiled gently. Older than anyone alive. The forest keeps some secrets. But I can tell you this. He has waited many lifetimes. For what? The monk looked directly into her eyes. For you. The word settled heavily inside the quiet sanctuary. Liora shook her head. No, I'm only an herbalist. My parents were ordinary people. Brother Thomas slowly reached beneath his robe. He unfolded a small piece of faded cloth embroidered with a delicate silver symbol. A wolf surrounded by leaves. Liora's breath caught. My mother. She whispered. She had that symbol. The old monk nodded. Because she carried the blood of the last keeper of the wolves. Liora stared at the cloth. My mother never told me. She couldn't. Brother Thomas's voice became softer. Those who hunted the keepers never truly disappeared. He stepped closer. When your parents died during the mountain sickness. His eyes filled with sadness. Many believed the final blessing had vanished forever. The ancient white wolf quietly approached Liora. He gently lowered his massive head. His nose touched the embroidered cloth. For one brief moment, the silver threads shimmered with faint light. Brother Thomas smiled. The forest remembers what people forget. Their peace did not last. Far outside the sanctuary, the sharp cry of a hawk echoed through the valley. The ancient white wolf's ears lifted immediately. Another cry followed. Closer. Urgent. Brother Thomas's expression changed. Our watchers. He hurried toward the cave entrance. Liora followed. From the rocky ledge outside, thick smoke curled above the distant trees. Not from a campfire. Too much smoke. Too black. The old monk closed his eyes. They've found us. Moments later, frightened deer burst through the forest below. Rabbits scattered beneath bushes. Birds exploded into the sky. Then came another sound. Axes. Trees crashing to the ground. Metal striking stone. Prince Cedric's soldiers were forcing their way through Moonwood. The wolves surrounding the sanctuary appeared from every direction. Grey. Black. Brown. Young wolves stood protectively beside older ones. None panicked. They simply waited for the ancient white wolf. The great guardian stepped onto the rocky ledge overlooking the valley. His silver eyes settled upon the rising smoke. Then he released one deep howl. It rolled through the mountains like distant thunder. Every wolf answered. Brother Thomas turned toward Liora. There is no more time. He placed the embroidered cloth into her hands. From this moment forward, you carry the covenant. Liora looked toward the burning forest below. Flames spread from tree to tree. The sanctuary that had survived centuries was about to be discovered. And somewhere within that growing wall of smoke, Prince Cedric's army was marching straight toward them. First flames reached the edge of the hidden valley before sunset. Smoke drifted between the ancient pines, turning the pale winter sky into a dull curtain of grey. Ash floated through the cold air like black snow, settling over moss-covered stones that had remained untouched for centuries. The sanctuary had survived storms, wars, and forgotten ages. It had never known fire. Liora stood at the mouth of the cave, her fingers tightening around the embroidered cloth Brother Thomas had placed in her hands. The silver wolf stitched into its faded fabric seemed to shimmer whenever the firelight reflected across it. Far below, axes continued striking trees. The rhythm was slow, relentless. Each blow echoed through the valley like the heartbeat of an approaching army. Brother Thomas quietly gathered several ancient scrolls from a stone shelf inside the sanctuary. He rolled each one carefully before placing them into a weathered leather case. "They burned the last sanctuary in the eastern mountains 40 years ago," he said softly. "I prayed this one would never suffer the same fate." Liora looked around the vast chamber. The stone carvings, the crystal stream, the wildflowers blooming beneath shafts of sunlight. It felt less like a cave and more like the memory of another world. "We can't let them destroy this." Brother Thomas smiled sadly. "Stone can be rebuilt." He rested one gentle hand upon one of the carved wolves. "But truth," his eyes met hers, "must survive inside people." Outside, the ancient white wolf stood upon the highest rock overlooking the valley. Around him gathered dozens of wolves from every corner of Moonwood. Grey wolves, black wolves, young wolves barely larger than hunting dogs, old wolves whose scarred faces spoke of countless winters. None made a sound. The great guardian slowly raised his head toward the darkening sky. One deep howl rolled across the mountains. Immediately the wolves scattered. Not in panic. With purpose. Some disappeared toward the western ridges. Others raced into narrow valleys hidden beneath towering cliffs. Several remained close to the sanctuary, silently watching every approach. Liora realized something. They're not preparing to fight. Brother Thomas nodded. They're protecting one another. The old monk smiled. That has always been their first instinct. Night fell before Prince Cedric's soldiers reached the hidden valley. Their torches glowed between the trees like dozens of angry stars. Armor clattered. Horses snorted nervously. Many soldiers glanced uneasily toward the surrounding forest. One young guard whispered to another. "Have you noticed?" "What?" "There aren't any birds." The second soldier looked upward. He froze. Not a single raven. Not a single owl. Not even the sound of insects. The forest had become impossibly still. Something was watching. Captain Roland, commander of Cedric's forces, drew his sword. "Keep moving." His voice sounded far stronger than he felt. "No one leaves formation." The soldiers obeyed. But every hand tightened around spear shafts. Every eye searched the darkness beyond the torchlight. From high above, hidden among enormous pine branches, wolves watched the army pass beneath them. No growls. No attacks. Only patient observation. The ancient white wolf stood on a distant ridge. His silver eyes followed every movement. He was measuring. Waiting. Protecting. Brother Thomas led Liora through a narrow passage at the rear of the sanctuary. The tunnel sloped steadily upward beneath the mountain. Cold water dripped from the ceiling. Ancient lantern niches carved into the walls suggested people had once traveled this path often. "Where does it lead?" Liora asked. "The place where the covenant was born." The old monk's voice echoed softly. "The moon altar." They climbed for nearly an hour before moonlight appeared ahead. The tunnel opened onto the highest peak in Moonwood. Liora stopped breathing. An enormous circular platform had been carved directly into the mountain itself. White marble reflected the moon like still water. Ancient symbols spiraled across the floor. Tall stone pillars surrounded the altar, each engraved with wolves standing beside crowned men and women. At the center rested a smooth silver stone unlike anything Liora had ever seen. It glowed softly beneath the moon. Not brightly. Like something alive. The ancient white wolf quietly stepped beside it. For the first time since meeting him, Liora saw uncertainty in his ancient eyes. Brother Thomas slowly approached the altar. This place existed before castles. He rested one weathered hand upon the glowing stone. Before kingdoms. The first guardians came here whenever the balance between people and nature was broken. Liora carefully examined the carved symbols. They almost look like roots. Brother Thomas smiled. Because everything living grows from something unseen. He turned toward her. The covenant isn't magic. It's trust. When rulers protected forests, rivers, and the helpless. He looked toward the white guardian. The wolves stood beside them. When greed replaced compassion, the land itself began to suffer. Liora thought of Briar Glen. The harvests had indeed become smaller each passing year. Streams she remembered from childhood no longer flowed as strongly. Even birds seemed fewer than before. She had never connected those changes. Until now. The old monk removed one final object from the leather case. A beautifully carved wooden box. Inside rested a single crystal no larger than a bird's egg. Soft silver light pulsed gently within it. This is called the heart of the covenant. Liora stared at it. It feels warm. Brother Thomas nodded. It carries the promises of every keeper before you. She looked at him, startled. Before me. There has always been a keeper. He smiled gently. Until now. The words settled heavily upon her shoulders. I don't know how. You already do. I've only gathered herbs. You healed because you cared. You fed injured animals because no one else would. You crossed Moonwood to save one frightened child. The old monk's eyes glistened. A keeper is never chosen for strength. They're chosen because compassion is the first answer their heart offers. A freezing wind swept across the mountain. Clouds rolled over the moon. The glowing stone dimmed. The ancient white wolf suddenly lifted his head. His ears pointed toward the southern valley. Moments later another wolf appeared. Then another. Both were breathing hard. Fresh blood stained one wolf's shoulder. They had not come from battle. They had come with warning. Brother Thomas closed his eyes. They've reached the sanctuary. Smoke began rising through the trees below. Orange flames flickered between ancient pines. The hidden sanctuary was burning. Liora felt tears sting her eyes. So much history. Brother Thomas gently shook his head. No. He looked toward her. History is walking beside me. The fire spread quickly through the lower valley. Though much of the sanctuary had been carved from stone, its ancient wooden bridges, shelves, and hanging gardens disappeared beneath smoke and flame. Captain Roland watched from outside the cave entrance. We found nothing. One soldier kicked aside a broken clay cup. No treasure. No army. No king. Only abandoned carvings and old memories. Prince Cedric arrived shortly afterward. His black horse snorted uneasily beneath him. He stared at the ancient sanctuary. So, he murmured. The stories were true. He slowly dismounted. His cold eyes examined every carving along the walls. Wolves. Kings. Families. The same images repeated again and again. His jaw tightened. Burn all of it. Captain Roland hesitated. My prince. It's only stone. Cedric turned sharply. It's evidence. Moments later oil was poured across centuries-old murals. Torches followed. Flames climbed eagerly across history. High above the valley, Liora watched black smoke stain the evening sky. She did not cry. She quietly folded the embroidered cloth against her heart. I won't let them erase it. The ancient white wolf looked at her. Then slowly stepped toward the center of the moon altar. He placed one enormous paw upon the glowing silver stone. Immediately every symbol carved across the mountain began shining. Silver light flowed between the ancient markings like rivers awakening after winter. Brother Thomas drew a slow breath. The altar has accepted you. Liora looked at the glowing stone. What must I do? The old monk hesitated. His peaceful face suddenly carried sorrow. There is something I never wished to tell you. The wind grew colder. The silver light pulsed beneath their feet. The covenant cannot be restored without sacrifice. Liora's heartbeat quickened. What kind of sacrifice? Brother Thomas lowered his eyes. The land does not ask for blood. It asks for the one thing every heart protects most. He looked back at her. You must willingly surrender your happiest memories. Silence settled across the mountain. Lyra's fingers slowly tightened around the embroidered cloth. She thought of her mother singing while drying herbs beneath the summer sun. Her father lifting her onto his shoulders so she could touch apple blossoms. The tiny cottage filled with laughter before sickness stole everything away. Those memories were all she had left of them. If she gave them away, she would remember their love. But never again the sound of their voices. A tear slipped quietly down her cheek. Far below, the fires continued burning. Above them, thunder rolled beyond the mountains. The ancient white wolf gently rested his great head against her shoulder. Not asking. Simply reminding her that she would never carry the choice alone. At that same moment, far beyond Moonwood, Prince Cedric stood before his assembled army. Hundreds of soldiers filled the frozen valley below the mountain. He slowly drew his sword toward the moonlit sky. At dawn. His voice echoed across the snow. Every wolf in Moonwood dies. The order rolled through the ranks like a winter wind. High upon the sacred mountain, Liora closed her eyes. The time for hiding was over. The covenant would be tested before another sunrise. The longest night of winter settled over Moonwood like a heavy cloak. Snow fell without hurry, covering burned branches and blackened earth until the forest looked untouched once more. Beneath that blanket of white, however, the scent of smoke still lingered, and every gust of wind carried tiny flakes of ash through the silent pines. Liora did not sleep. She remained beside the moon altar while the ancient white wolf rested only a few steps away. His silver eyes never fully closed. Every few moments they drifted toward the southern valleys, where hundreds of torchlights flickered beneath the trees. Prince Cedric's army had surrounded Moonwood. The wolves knew it. The forest knew it. Morning would decide the fate of them all. Brother Thomas quietly placed another log onto the small fire burning beside the altar. The flames crackled softly. You still have time to leave. Liora looked into the dancing firelight. And let them destroy everything. The old monk sighed. I've buried too many good people. I don't wish to bury another. She smiled gently. My parents once told me something. Brother Thomas listened. When fear asks us to run. Her eyes reflected the fire. Kindness asks us to stay. The old monk lowered his head. He could find no wiser answer. Before dawn, a deep howl echoed across the mountains. Another answered. Then another. Liora stepped to the edge of the sacred platform. The sight before her stole her breath. Every ridge surrounding Moonwood was alive. Hundreds of wolves stood silently upon the snowy slopes. Grey coats blended with stone. Black wolves watched from pine shadows. Young wolves remained close to older guardians. No chaos. No panic. Only quiet resolve. The ancient white wolf slowly climbed onto the highest stone at the center of the altar. As the first light of dawn touched his white fur, he seemed almost carved from the mountain itself. He raised his head. One calm howl rolled across the kingdom. Immediately every wolf answered. The earth itself seemed to vibrate beneath their voices. Far below, Prince Cedric looked toward the mountains. His horse shifted nervously. Even the seasoned soldiers tightened their grip upon their weapons. Captain Roland swallowed. It sounds like. He searched for the right words. The whole forest is alive. Cedric's expression remained cold. They're animals. He raised his sword. They bleed like anything else. Trumpets shattered the morning silence. Soldiers marched forward. Rows of shields advanced through the snow while archers climbed nearby ridges. The first arrows flew. Their dark shapes disappeared into the forest. The wolves did not charge. Instead, they vanished. like mist carried by the wind. Arrows struck empty snow. Spears found nothing. The soldiers pressed deeper into Moonwood. Suddenly wolves appeared behind them. Not attacking. Guiding. Dividing. Leading horses away from steep cliffs. Driving frightened men toward open ground rather than dangerous ravines. Captain Roland frowned. "They're not trying to kill us." A young soldier looked around in confusion. "They're protecting." Before he finished speaking, the ground beneath one group of soldiers collapsed into a hidden sinkhole buried beneath fresh snow. 3 wolves rushed forward before anyone else could react. Instead of attacking the trapped men, they barked loudly until nearby soldiers pulled their companions to safety. Captain Roland stared in disbelief. "They..." His voice faltered. "They saved them." Far above, Liora watched everything. Even facing death, the wolves refused cruelty. The Covenant had never been about power. It had always been about mercy. Prince Cedric had seen enough. His face twisted with anger. "They're buying time." He turned toward his captains. "Find the altar. Kill the white wolf. Burn everything." Hundreds of soldiers changed direction. They climbed toward the sacred mountain. The final battle had begun. Brother Thomas stepped beside Liora. "The moment has come." At the center of the altar, the heart of the Covenant glowed brighter than ever before. Silver light flowed through every carved symbol beneath their feet. The ancient white wolf quietly approached. He lowered his great head until his forehead gently touched Liora's. For a moment, the world disappeared. She saw countless faces. Men, women, children, every keeper who had stood upon this mountain before her. Each smiling peacefully, each carrying the same quiet courage. The vision faded. Brother Thomas carefully lifted the glowing crystal from its wooden box. "The altar asks only one question." He placed it into Liora's trembling hands. "What will you freely give, so others may live?" Tears blurred her vision. She closed her fingers around the warm crystal. Immediately memories filled her heart. Her mother's gentle laugh while hanging herbs outside their cottage. Her father carving tiny wooden birds during snowy evenings. Running through summer fields beneath bright blue skies. Warm bread cooling upon the windowsill. Birthday songs. Goodnight hugs. Simple moments. Ordinary moments. The greatest treasures she possessed. She whispered into the quiet morning. "I have nothing richer than these." The wind suddenly stopped. Every wolf became still. Every bird fell silent. Liora slowly knelt before the moon altar. "If these memories can heal the kingdom." She smiled through tears. "Then let them become tomorrow's hope." She gently placed both hands upon the glowing stone. "I give them freely." The mountain answered. Silver light burst upward like a pillar reaching toward the heavens. It spread across every ancient carving, every standing stone, every towering pine. The light raced through roots hidden beneath the earth. Across rivers. Across valleys. Across forgotten ruins buried beneath moss. Liora gasped. Warmth flooded through her body. One memory slipped away. Her mother's voice. Faded into silence. Another disappeared. The smell of fresh wildflowers beside their little home. Gone. She reached for them. They drifted beyond her grasp like snow melting beneath spring sunlight. Tears streamed freely down her face. Yet she never pulled her hands away. "I remember," she whispered, "that they loved me." The words trembled. "I don't need anything more." The heart of the Covenant shattered. Not into broken pieces. Into thousands of tiny lights. Each floated gently into the sky before drifting across the kingdom like glowing snowflakes. Every river they touched became clear once more. Frozen streams burst into life. Withered trees awakened. Flowers hidden beneath winter frost began blooming despite the season. Birdsong returned. Even the cold wind carried the scent of fresh pine instead of smoke. The land remembered itself. The ancient white wolf lifted his head. Silver light surrounded his enormous body. His scars faded. His ancient white coat shimmered like moonlit water. The transformation began slowly. 4 powerful legs became 2. Paws became hands. The great wolf's towering frame shifted until a tall man stood where the guardian had rested for centuries. Long silver hair flowed across his shoulders. A simple white cloak formed around him like woven light. His eyes remained the same. Gentle. Ancient. Filled with endless patience. Brother Thomas quietly knelt. The first guardian king. The reborn king looked toward Liora. His voice carried the calm strength of mountains. You remembered compassion. He smiled. When the world remembered only fear. Liora stared in silent wonder. The ancient guardian had not disappeared. He had simply come home. Far below, soldiers stopped fighting. They watched silver light spread across the kingdom. The rivers glowed. The forests shimmered. Flowers pushed through snow before their eyes. Captain Roland slowly removed his helmet. What is this? No one answered. Even Prince Cedric looked shaken. For one brief moment, the kingdom itself seemed alive again. Then, a shadow moved behind the reborn guardian king. Prince Cedric had climbed the mountain unseen during the miracle. His sword flashed beneath the pale winter sun. With a roar of hatred, he drove the blade toward the guardian king's back. Liora saw it. There was no time to think. Only time to choose. She threw herself between the ancient king and the falling blade. Steel met flesh before anyone could cry out. The sharp ring of Prince Cedric's sword echoed across the moon altar, followed by a sudden silence so deep that even the wind seemed to stop breathing. Liora stumbled forward. The blade had cut across her shoulder as she threw herself between the guardian king and the prince. Warm blood stained the white fabric of her cloak, spreading slowly across the silver embroidery her mother had once carried. She fell to one knee. Snow beneath her turned crimson. The reborn guardian king caught her before she struck the frozen stone. His steady hands trembled for the first time in centuries. Liora. Her name left his lips like a prayer. She forced a weak smile. I'm all right. But her pale face told another story. Prince Cedric pulled his sword free and stepped backward. His eyes darted across the glowing altar, searching for the fear he expected to see. Instead, he found something that unsettled him far more. No one hated him. The guardian king looked upon him with sadness. Brother Thomas closed his eyes in silent grief. Even Liora, weakened and bleeding into the snow, held no anger in her gaze. Cedric's grip tightened around his sword. Why won't you fight? His voice cracked across the mountain. You have power now. The guardian king slowly rose. Silver light flowed gently around him. I have strength. His calm voice carried across the sacred peak. But strength without mercy built the prison you now rule. Cedric laughed bitterly. Mercy is weakness. No. The guardian king took one quiet step forward. Fear is. Below the mountain, Captain Roland watched the light spreading through the valley. His soldiers no longer stood in perfect formation. Many had lowered their weapons. Several quietly stared at wolves helping wounded men across icy ground. One exhausted archer looked down in disbelief as a grey wolf gently nudged a fallen soldier toward safety instead of finishing him. Another soldier whispered, "They could have killed us." Captain Roland nodded slowly. But they didn't. The words settled heavily over the army. The stories they had believed all their lives were falling apart before their eyes. Prince Cedric noticed the hesitation spreading through his forces. His face darkened. Raise your bows. No one moved. I gave you an order. Several soldiers looked toward Captain Roland. The captain slowly removed his sword from its sheath. For one long moment Cedric smiled. Then Roland turned the blade downward and planted its tip into the snow. One by one, spears fell. Shields lowered. Swords disappeared back into their scabbards. No speeches were needed. The silence itself became their answer. Cedric stared in disbelief. You betray your prince. Roland met his eyes. We served the crown. He glanced toward Liora, still kneeling beside the altar. We were never meant to serve cruelty. Rage consumed Cedric. He let out a furious cry and charged once more. This time there was no hesitation. He aimed directly for Liora. "If I cannot rule this kingdom," he shouted, "no one will." Before he reached her, a massive grey wolf stepped into his path. Not with snapping jaws. Not with violence. It simply stood between the prince and the wounded keeper. Cedric struck wildly. The wolf moved aside. Another appeared. Then another. Within seconds, dozens of wolves quietly surrounded him. None attacked. None growled. They simply refused to move. The prince spun in every direction. Every path was blocked by calm golden eyes. He had spent his entire life believing power came from making others fear him. Now he faced creatures that feared nothing because they protected something greater than themselves. His sword suddenly felt very small. The Guardian King slowly approached. His footsteps left faint trails of silver light upon the snow. "You still have a choice." Cedric laughed bitterly. "You expect forgiveness. I offer truth." The ancient king looked toward the forest below. "This land has room even for those who have lost their way." For the briefest moment, Cedric's hard expression wavered. A memory flickered behind his eyes. A young boy running through green fields before ambition taught him to see every kindness as weakness. But pride had ruled his heart for too many years. With a cry of desperation, he swung once more. The ancient stone beneath his feet cracked. The edge of the altar crumbled away. Cedric lost his balance. His sword flew from his hand. He reached desperately for solid ground. There was none. The Guardian King lunged forward. His hand caught Cedric's wrist. For one suspended heartbeat, the ruler of the Old Covenant held the man who had tried to destroy him. "You would save me," Cedric whispered. The Guardian King's grip tightened. "I will not become what you believed I was." Tears filled Cedric's eyes. Not from pain. From shame. Slowly, he released his own hand. The Guardian King tried to hold him. But Cedric had already made his choice. He fell into the mist below, disappearing among the cliffs that surrounded the sacred mountain. No triumphant cheer followed. Only silence. A sad silence for a man who had spent his entire life chasing power until nothing else remained. Justice had arrived without hatred. Snow continued falling. Soft. Gentle. Almost peaceful. Brother Thomas hurried to Lyra's side and carefully wrapped clean cloth around her wounded shoulder. The bleeding slowly eased. The Guardian King knelt beside her. "You gave away your happiest memories." His voice was filled with quiet sorrow. "And still you chose to protect another." Lyra searched his face. She knew he mattered. She knew Brother Thomas mattered. She remembered her parents loved her deeply. Yet their voices, their smiles, the tiny moments she had treasured, had become warm spaces inside her heart that she could no longer fully see. She touched the embroidered cloth resting against her chest. "I can't remember their faces." A single tear escaped. "But," she smiled softly, "I remember how they taught me to love." Brother Thomas quietly wiped his own eyes. Some gifts were too sacred for words. As the morning sun climbed above the mountains, its golden light spread across the kingdom. The change was impossible to ignore. The burned edges of Moonwood disappeared beneath fresh green shoots pushing through the snow. Ancient oaks that had stood lifeless for years unfurled bright new leaves. Streams overflowed with crystal-clear water. Deer cautiously returned to the valleys. Birdsong echoed from every branch. Even the air smelled different. Fresh pine. Wildflowers. Rain carried from distant hills. The land had begun breathing again. News of the miracle traveled faster than any royal messenger. Villagers came first. Then farmers. Hunters. Blacksmiths. Mothers carrying children. Old men leaning on wooden staffs. When they reached Moonwood, they stopped in quiet wonder. Instead of finding monsters, they found wolves walking peacefully among people. A little girl carefully held out a piece of bread to a young wolf. The animal accepted it gently before trotting back into the forest. No fear. Only trust. Captain Roland stepped before the gathered crowd. He removed the royal crest from his cloak and laid it upon the ground. Then he bowed before Liora. Not because she demanded it, because gratitude asked it of him. Soon others followed. Not to worship, but to honor the woman whose compassion had saved a kingdom. Lyra's cheeks warmed with embarrassment. She had never sought recognition. She had only wanted to protect life wherever she found it. Days turned into weeks. Winter slowly gave way to spring. Fields once covered by frost became seas of green. Apple trees blossomed across Briar Glen. Children laughed beside rivers that sparkled beneath the sunlight. Moonwood was no longer feared. Travelers entered respectfully, leaving gifts of flowers instead of weapons. The wolves remained guardians of the forest. Not pets. Not servants. Partners. The old covenant had truly returned. On the first full moon of spring, the Guardian King asked Lyra to walk with him to the center of the ancient clearing where they had first met. The standing stones glowed softly beneath the silver sky. Every wolf gathered quietly around them. The great white guardian's form had become faint, almost transparent. His time in the human world was ending. The covenant no longer needs me. He smiled. It needs someone whose heart still belongs to tomorrow. He placed one glowing hand gently over Lyra's. Silver light flowed into the embroidered symbol she carried. The ancient mark shimmered brilliantly before settling into a soft, steady glow. The keepers never ruled, he said. They simply reminded others how to care. Lyra nodded. I'll protect it. I know. He looked toward the waiting wolves. They already do. One by one, the wolves lowered their heads. Not in worship. In welcome. Lyra felt tears gathering once more. This time they were not born from loss. They came from belonging. The Guardian King looked one final time across the forests he had protected for centuries. The rivers. The mountains. The villages alive with laughter. Then his body dissolved into thousands of tiny silver lights. They rose quietly into the night sky like a river of stars before disappearing among the heavens. The wind gently stirred the trees. For a brief moment, every leaf seemed to whisper the same promise. The covenant would never be forgotten again. Years later, travelers crossing the northern kingdoms often spoke of Moonwood. They told stories of wolves that walked beside children without fear. Of forests that welcomed those who entered with kindness. Of a quiet keeper who healed the sick, comforted the lonely, and listened to every living creature as though each carried a story worth hearing. Some visitors searched for the secret words that had made the ancient wolves kneel. They imagined a forgotten spell. An old language. Powerful magic. The elders would only smile. Because the truth had never been hidden inside mysterious words. On that snowy evening long ago, Lyra had simply thanked a lonely guardian for protecting a frightened child when the rest of the world remembered only fear. That quiet whisper had carried something stronger than commands, stronger than crowns, and stronger than armies. It carried compassion. And in the end, compassion became the only voice powerful enough to make even the wildest hearts bow willingly.